Most people never reach mastery because they never truly cross the line from interest into obsession. And by the end of this video, you'll know exactly which side you're on. You've been trying to improve while staying comfortable, but that comfort is the very thing slowing you down. Watch till the end because the stakes are simple. Either you let your craft shape you, or the world will shape you into someone who never even tried. And once you hear the shift I'm about to explain, it's impossible to unhear it. I want to start with something uncomfortable. Most people never truly get good at anything because they never stay in the water long enough to drown a little bit. Usually we dip our feet in, we test the temperature. They post about working on themselves, but the second the water rises to the neck, they climb out. And we wonder why everyone else is passing us. We live in a culture obsessed with balance. Take breaks, don't overdo it, protect your peace, and somehow, in all that softness, we forget the simple truth that every master figured out alone in the dark. Mastery begins the moment you stop fighting the current and let yourself get pulled under. I think that's the part no one wants to talk about. Not on social media, not in self-help circles, not in those sterile conversations about productivity hacks. People talk about discipline and they talk about routines. They talk about being dedicated, but dedication is polite. Obsession is violent. And mastery demands violence. Not against others, but against your former self. Balance looks good, right? On vision boards, on mood boards. Balance sounds healthy, stable, responsible. But ask anyone who's reached the top of their craft, and they will tell you all the same thing, in different words. There was a period in their life where nothing else existed. Not parties, not comfort, not relationships, not hobbies, not rest that wasn't earned through collapse. Just the work, just the thing, the engine inside them that refused to shut off. You don't build greatness in a balanced state. Balance is maintenance. Balance is what you do after you built something worth maintaining. So when you're climbing, balance is dead weight. The irony is that people try to stay balanced when complaining they can't break through. They keep one foot in the old life and one foot in the new one, and we wonder why we feel split in half. You can't become someone new while still protecting the comfort of who you were. The brain doesn't learn deeply through mild interest. Okay, it learns through immersion, learns through repeated exposure so intense that it starts to remodel itself around the task. Neutral pathways don't strengthen because you practiced for 15 minutes and went back to scrolling on TikTok. They strengthen because you practiced for 3 hours, thought about it while you were eating, replayed your mistakes while showering, studied the theory before bed. Mastery happens when the craft becomes the dominant language in your mind. Balance doesn't do that. Okay, balance doesn't rewire anything. Balance creates generalists, people who are decent at many things and great at nothing. It's the people who go under, who disappear into the craft, who come out with skills others can't understand. This is why obsession is the natural engine of mastery. It is the only state powerful enough to override distractions, comfort, and fear. I think most people spend their whole lives in interest. Interest is cute, it's soft, it gives you the illusion of progress. You buy the book, you watch the video, you organize your workspace. But interest evaporates under pressure. A calling doesn't. A calling is not a hobby. It's this gravitational force. It pulls you in even when you're tired. It keeps you up at night thinking about what you could fix, improve, create. You can take breaks from interest, but you can't escape a calling. The moment you cross that invisible line, the moment you stop asking, do I feel like doing this? And start asking, how can I get better at this right now? You've entered a different life, and a life where most people will never taste. People don't stay average because they lack talent. People stay average because they refuse to surrender comfort. Comfort is familiar. Comfort is predictable. Comfort is you're fine where you are. You don't need to push. Comfort doesn't attack you. It seduces you. It's this talent dies in comfort. Potential dissolves in comfort. Everything you could have been rots inside the warmth of comfort. Mastery requires cold rooms, late nights, the kind of repetition that makes the normal people uncomfortable. Most people want greatness. right? They just don't want discomfort. And the universe only trades in equivalence. So there is always a moment, sometimes small or sometimes violent, when creatives drift from normal effort into something else entirely. Maybe you're practicing and suddenly you realize hours have passed by without you noticing. Maybe you catch yourself studying details nobody has ever cared about. Maybe you wake up thinking about the work before you check your phone. That's the moment you cross that threshold. It's rarely dramatic. It often feels very quiet, very private, like something clicked inside of us. And you don't force yourself anymore. You're very pulled, you're claimed. From the outside, people see obsession. From the inside, it feels like alignment to us. You're not chasing the craft is chasing you. So people say they want to be great, but I don't think that's the whole truth. What they want is the identity of someone great without the psychological depth it requires. Because obsession demands you shed parts of yourself. Your laziness, your excuses, your distractions, your emotional comfort, your need to be liked, your fear of looking stupid, your addiction to validation. Every step deeper into mastery feels like ripping out something soft and replacing it with something sharp. So most people don't want to feel that. They want to feel comfortable. So they stay in that shallow little end, safe, untouched, unchanged, and years later, they call it balance. But I want to be blunt, right? To master anything, whether that's art, writing, fashion, storytelling, design, film, whatever it can be, you have to drown in it. You must let it take you. You let it eat your time. You let it devour the weaker parts of you. You're going to lose things, whether that's free time, relationships, friendships, scrolling, fake confidence, the illusion of I'll do it later. But you're going to gain things too. Focus, clarity, identity, momentum. All these things, a self that feels like it was forged, not found. And drowning is scary, right? But on the other side is someone unrecognizable to the older version of you. Someone sharper, someone heavier, someone who breathes differently because the work is now part of their lungs. So you cannot remain the same person and expect to reach a level that demands you become someone else. You cannot remain the same person and expect to reach a level that demands you to become someone else. Balance is for maintenance. Obsession is for transformation. And most people want transformation without the drowning. But drowning is the invitation. Every mastery, every icon, every creative who changed something, they all started by letting go of the edge of the pool and letting the water swallow them whole. And when they resurfaced, they weren't beginners anymore. They were forged. There's this moment in every creator's life when the work stops being something they do, and it starts to become the place where their identity lives. And it doesn't really happen suddenly. There's no fireworks, there's no divine announcement, no dramatic scene. It happens the same way a room gets dark, one shade at a time. You pick up your craft because it feels good, because it gives you something to aim at, something to build, something to hold on to in a world that never stops moving. But somewhere along the way, something flips. And I think you realize you don't practice anymore, you're returning to yourself. You don't study anymore. You're feeding the only part of you that feels awake. You don't plan anymore. You're strategizing how to become who you know you can be. And this chapter is all about that shift, that psychological moment where your craft stops being an interest and starts to become home. So normal life feels strange during this phase. So people talk about their weekend plans, gossip, drama, routine, and you're sitting there thinking about, every detail in your work that no one else really on earth cares about. You stop relating to things that used to entertain you. You stop laughing at jokes you would have found funny a year ago. You stop craving the same validation, the same noise, and the same distractions. It's not that you become cold or distant. It's that the world feels completely blurry compared to the clarity that you feel when you're working. You become someone who lives between two realities: the normal world, which is predictable, slow, and numb, and the world of your craft, sharp, urgent, demanding, alive. And the more time you spend in your second one, the harder it becomes to pretend the first one matters. So this is where people misunderstand you. They think you're obsessive, they think you're isolating yourself, they think you're taking it way too seriously, but they don't understand the truth, right? That you finally found something worth taking seriously. So there is a unique loneliness that comes with pursuing mastery. And not because you're physically alone, but because your mind starts to move in a complete direction that most people never go to. You stop chasing comfort, you stop chasing entertainment, you stop chasing approval, and that alone creates distance. People who once understood you stop understanding you. Friends who used to feel close start feeling far away. Their conversations don't really match your priorities. Their pace doesn't match your urgency. Their goals don't match the future. You outgrow people without trying. You shed old versions of yourself without meaning to. And it hurts. Not because you want to stay the same, but because changing means leaving things behind. And that's the price that no one's going to talk about. That everyone loves the idea of becoming better, but very few understand the improvement is a form of death. The old you doesn't evolve, it gets buried. Piece by piece, habit by habit, fear by fear. And mastery requires you to grieve who you were in order to become who you need to be. So most people think obsession destroys you, but obsession is often the first time you ever get to meet yourself without noise. When you're so immersed into the craft, you see where your mind goes under pressure, what you care about when no one is watching, what weakness you can't hide, what strengths you can't deny, what fears still control you, and what greatness you're scared to admit you want. Obsession strips you bare completely, right? There's no performance, there's no persona, no social media, no curated identity. It's you versus the work, you versus the limits, you versus the excuses. And it's the first time in your life you hear yourself so clearly. And that clarity is addictive. It's why obsessed people seem different, right? It's the way they talk with a certain weight in their voice. It's the way they look at the world from a different angle. They see themselves without that noise. And once you have experienced that level of internal honesty, superficial living becomes impossible almost. Here's something that most people don't really know. Identity doesn't change through reflection. Identity changes through repetition. You don't become someone new by thinking about it. You become someone new by doing the work again and again until the work becomes the only story your mind knows. I think this is why immersion feels like a possession almost. Your brain adapts to whatever it sees the most. If you spend 6 hours a day creating, learning, analyzing, breaking down, rebuilding, your brain will restructure itself around that craft. Patterns of thoughts sharpen, instincts evolve, your internal language changes, and you don't just get better at your craft. You become the kind of person who gets better. That's the identity shift. It's not that I'm trying to get good at this. It's more of I'm the kind of person who dedicates their life to this. And once your identity aligns with that obsession, there is no going back. Normal effort is insulting. Half measures feel wrong. Distraction feels like a betrayal. You've crossed that psychological point of no return. I think this is the most liberating moments in the entire journey, is when you're so fully immersed, the opinions of others start to lose gravity. And not because you're arrogant, not because you think you're better, but because your craft becomes the only metric that matters. That feedback loop between you and the work just becomes stronger than any external voice. You no longer create to impress, you create to grow, to create to understand. You create because creation is now your language. The world becomes background noise, the craft becomes the conversations, and this alone makes you appear different. People who need validation won't understand you. People who need applause won't relate to you. People who need comfort won't follow you, and that's fine. Because mastery requires choosing the path of being misunderstood. Every great creative, athlete, thinker, and builder was misunderstood at the exact moment they become dangerous. People love to say, don't take it too far, but what they don't want to admit is that everything great comes from someone who took it too far. There is always a moment right before the breakthrough where obsession looks like insanity, where your focus becomes too sharp, where your standards become way too high, where your vision becomes too specific, where your tolerance for mediocrity disappears. When you start demanding more of yourself than anyone thinks is normal. And this is a line that most people avoid. And not because it's dangerous, but because it's very clarifying. And clarity scares people Because once you know what you want, you can't go back to pretending you don't. Once you know what you're capable of, you can't hide behind excuses anymore. Once you know you're meant to go further, staying small feels suffocating. Geniuses, madness live close together because both require complete surrender. Both demand the death of the ego, both demand isolation, both demand risk. The difference is really simple though. Madness makes you lose yourself, mastery makes you build yourself. So here's the truth. Even the most obsessed creators rest, but not for the reasons people think. They don't rest to find balance, they rest to protect momentum. They don't rest to escape the work, they rest to return to its sharper. Rest becomes this tool, not a lifestyle. Silence becomes sharpening. Sleep becomes maintenance. Solitude becomes fuel. You don't unplug to forget your craft, you unplug to preserve the machine. This is why obsessed people avoid burnout better than average people. Their rest has purpose. Their rest is invested. Their rest is a part of the plan. Balance says stop doing the thing that matters. Mastery says pause long enough to do it better. So once your craft becomes your identity, everything changes. Your priorities shift, your standards rise, your distractions fall away, your patience shortens, your clarity sharpens, your life rearranges itself around something bigger than comfort. You become the person who doesn't skip practice. You become the person who studies without being told. You become the person who cares too much, notices too much, tries too hard. You become the person others don't understand. And that's when you know you're on the right path. Because mastery isn't something you do, it's something you become. And becoming anything worthwhile requires quiet, internal transformation. A shift so deep that the world feels different when you look at it. That's the identity shift. That's the moment everything changes. That's the moment you stop being someone who does the craft and become someone who is the craft. At some point on this path, you start to realize something uncomfortable. Every obsession has a cost, and whether it's entry level of mastery demands a sacrifice. The higher you climb, the more expensive it will become. People love to romanticize the grind, right? They love the aesthetics of the late nights and cold coffees and desk lamps, and they love the idea of being someone who's all in. But the truth is far less glamorous. Real obsession rearranges your entire life. It really breaks things that were never meant to stay whole. It strips away comfort, illusions, parts of you that were only alive because you never really questioned them. No one shows you the loneliness, the missed moments, the internal friction that comes with devoting yourself to something most people quit after a month. But if you want to understand mastery, and not the idea of it, but the reality that you have to understand the cost, and you have to understand why. Even after seeing the cost, the obsession still chose this life. Here's a truth that many don't really hear often. Your obsession will change your relationships, and it's not out of malice, it's not out of arrogance, but because obsession demands a level of focus that most people don't understand and don't want to. People who used to feel close to you will drift, and not because they don't care, but because they're walking on a different path. They want comfort, ease, and predictability. You want difficulty, risk, precision, progress, and that makes you strange in a way, right? They say you're too serious, too intense, too focused, too into your work, but what they really mean is you're becoming someone I no longer really relate to, and that hurts. Rightfully so. It stings to realize that your growth naturally creates distance. And here's the deeper truth underneath all of this is that you outgrow people you were never meant to stay with. The right people will not be threatened by your obsession. The wrong people will. And you will have to decide which loss you're willing to accept. Losing your potential or losing people who were never meant to walk with you into your future. And you can't keep both. Mastery is not peaceful, okay? It's not calm, it's not aesthetic, it's this daily confrontation with your own limits. And this unspoken cost of obsession is the constant tension between who you are and who you're trying to become. You're going to feel restless even when you're improving. You're going to feel behind even when you're ahead. You'll feel the pressure even when no one is watching, and because the expectations are coming from you. So you start noticing every flaw, every weakness, every gap in your ability, every detail that needs fixing. Your craft becomes this mirror, the kind that shows you the truth without the permission, and facing that truth hurts. Most people avoid this. They really dilute their dreams, they lower their standards, they pretend they don't want more. And you're not going to get that luxury, because once obsession takes root, you can't lie to yourself anymore. Time truly becomes different when you are obsessed. It stops flowing for the way it does for others. You start measuring your days for growth instead of comfort. You start valuing hours the way investors value money. You start cutting out anything that doesn't amplify your focus, and you don't lose time, and you spend it with intention. I can say this because this is exactly what I have done. I cut out what I need to cut out. I see my days as measures of growth. I am completely obsessed with how I spend my time. So it's like you don't lose time, you're just spending it with intention. And that intention really requires sacrifice, and you have to be okay with that. You don't have the same free time as other people, and you won't say yes to everything. You won't follow the crowd, and you won't chase trends, and you won't fill your schedule with noise just to feel busy. You'll become really selective, very sharp, very deliberate, and people will call it dramatic. And the truth is simple: there is no mastery without domination of time. You don't become exceptional by fitting your craft into the cracks of your day. You become exceptional by cutting out the things that dilute you. And this is the part that no one really understands until they live it. Obsession is uncomfortable, but ignoring your calling is unbearable. When you're obsessed with something, truly obsessed, not doing it feels incredibly wrong. It feels like a betrayal. It feels like wasting time, wasting oxygen. It feels like letting your future self down. And this is how I felt, right? The pain of not working becomes heavier than the pain of working. So most people don't experience this because they never really push far enough to reach that threshold where the craft becomes the only place they feel alive. But once you reach it, right, there is no turning back. And you'll suffer if you work, and you'll suffer harder if you don't. And that's the paradox of mastery. And in that paradox lies the path forward. I think there's another uncomfortable truth we should probably talk about, is that people love the outcome of obsession, but they judge the process of it. They admire the skill, the success, the clarity, and the results. But they criticize the repetition, the isolation, the intensity, the hours, the sacrifices. They want the finish line without the burn marks. They want the reward without the prize. And I think this is why you can't really expect validation while you're still in that cocoon, right? People will misunderstand you the most at the exact moment you're becoming who you are meant to be. And the world respects results. That's the truth of it, and critiques the journey that creates them. And knowing this is going to save you from disappointment. Now for the payoff. Right? The part people downplay, but the part that makes every sacrifice worth it. Obsession separates you. And most people never get good at anything because they never push past average effort. They never let themselves drown. They never let the craft take over. They never let the identity shift happen. But you did. And once you cross that line, everything's going to change for you. You see opportunities others miss. You make connections others can't. Your intuition sharpens, your execution becomes automatic, your ideas get heavier, your vision becomes longer, and your self-respect grows because you've proven something to yourself that no one else can take away. Obsession places you in a very rare air, a place where competition thins, where excellence becomes normal, where talent is overshadowed by hunger, and where mastery finally feels possible. This is the payoff. And the payoff is knowing you become someone capable of doing what your old self would have quit. And most people never meet that version of themselves. They would rather die in the shallow end of their own potential. But you didn't. So by the time you reach this point, there is one last question you have to face. It's the same question every master had to answer at some point. Are you willing to pay the price? Not the romanticized price, Not the aesthetic price, not the Instagram price, the real one. The time, the loneliness, the obsession, the details, the doubt, the sacrifice, the eternal friction, the identity shift, the death of who you were, the birth of who you were meant to be. Are you willing to let the work consume you? Are you willing to drown in it? Are you willing to pursue something so fully that the world starts to feel like a distraction? And most people won't. And most people can't. And most people never will. But if you're still here, if you're still listening, then you already know the truth. That you were never built for the shallow end, and deep down, you know exactly where you're meant to become. Not balanced, not casual, not comfortable, but exceptional, because you chose the one thing most people fear. You let the work claim you.